So give me a big welcome, folks.
How about that? Yes, there we are. The mute button. Thank you for coming back. This is kind of the graveyard slot now, so you've done very well to come back. Just a couple of adverts to begin with. So I mentioned the Glastonbury Symposium in the first half. There are a few flyers at the back, on that back table. If you've never been, I mean, you know, it's not unrelated to what Trevor is doing here. It's 3 days of this kind of stuff, but of course in Glastonbury, and you've got all the Glastonbury sites, you know, literally outside the door. 30th anniversary. Unbelievably, next year. So do come and join us. It's really worth the trip. So take a leaflet. We haven't announced the speaker lineup yet. It'll be coming soon. So just check out the website there. Also at the back, my darling wife Helen did her talk earlier today. She's got some leaflets. If you want an astrological personal reading, I recommend it. I know I'm biased, but she's very good. And you won't regret it. So do take one of Helen's leaflets as well. So we're going to sort of shift gear now, but at the same time, it weaves into what we did earlier on this afternoon, because there are censorships of different kinds, and something that's very much been edited out of our society is what some quaintly call the paranormal. Now, you could argue about that phrase, paranormal, right? Does it really exist? In a way, no. Because everything sooner or later will have a scientific explanation. I mean, of course it will. But, you know, it gets branded paranormal, and let's just go with that, all right? It's good enough. So I'm going to start by showing you a video. Now, some of you will have seen this, but for those of you that haven't, well, take a look at this. So what we're seeing here, as you can see for yourself, is this strange light. Now, it sort of goes up into the sky, and then it begins to spiral. And then, as you will see, it sort of goes through a number of phases. It pulses, it revolves, it spirals. How many people here have seen this before? Oh, a few of you, okay. Now, well, actually, right, the likelihood is that most of you have seen this before. And the reason I can say that with some kind of confidence is that this was in the news back in 2009. So it's 10 years old now. This did make it into the mainstream news. And what we're looking at is clearly a spiral, but it appeared in the skies over Norway. And it was on the television on some channels, and it did make it into a few newspapers. So this actually did get reported, but it's funny. When I talk to people about it, most people have just no memory of it at all. And I think the reason they don't remember is that they were encouraged to forget about it very quickly. So this goes on, right? You're getting the idea here. There are many images. We know it's real. Thousands of people filmed it in different parts of Norway from different angles. So we know there's no fraud involved with this. And this was something which was kind of one of those quaint little mysteries to begin with. Was it atmospheric phenomena? Was it some secret weapon being tested? Was it a UFO? Well, I'll talk about that later. But then, a few days later, a kind of a quiet explanation. They didn't shout about it, but it appeared in a kind of a little part of the news, saying, oh, that spiral thing, oh, yes, don't worry about that. All it is a Russian missile going wrong. Now, number one, that might worry me slightly. But number two, okay, right, what's the evidence that it's a Russian missile? Well, this is one of the clips they released, ironically, of an American missile going wrong. Right, so, okay, have a look at this. Now, all right, now that twisty bit there, it's possible that that might explain that bit there. It's possible. But there is no video anywhere showing a missile going around and around that perfectly to create that kind of spiral in the sky. So if it was a Russian missile, number one, what's it doing over Norway? Why didn't that trigger some big international incident? I mean, maybe it would today, but back then, nobody seemed to think it mattered. But number two, if it was a Russian missile, how then do we explain that in the years since, several other spirals have been seen across the world? Australia, Middle East, Mexico. It's now a recurring phenomenon. And again, you look at the kind of places that, you know, investigate this sort of thing, you find lots of videos, lots of photographs taken by lots of people. Guess what the difference is now? it's not news anymore. Doesn't get reported in the mainstream anymore. It's like the first one got away and somebody went, whoa, well, don't report them anymore, or they got the call in the office. And now something like this can happen on a grand scale and nobody gets to hear about it. Now that's quite extraordinary, isn't it? Because you think, don't you, in the age of mass communication, something big like that in the sky, you couldn't hide it. You can. Because all you have to do is not tell people about it. And the people like us that might get to hear about it through certain channels, well, we can just be dismissed. We're just nutters anyway, aren't we? And that's the attitude. So this gets edited out as society. And now nobody even hears about them. So that reminds me of another mystery. And what I'm going to do in this talk is go through a number of unexplained mysteries to begin with. And it's going to start kind of light, but then we'll get sort of deeper. And we'll see how some of them have a linking thread. One of the threads is quite prophetic. And that there are certain themes in the way these things get treated by the mainstream. So let's have a quick look at these things then. Some of you here will know that crop circles have been a little passion of mine for years. I would not be standing on the stage today were it not for crop circles. So, okay, a brief resume. There's a whole talk about crop circles. We'll save that for another time. They've been appearing for centuries. There are clear records going back to at least the 1600s, probably about 300 or so historical records. You've got photographs going back to the 1930s. We have eyewitnesses, people who've watched these things appearing. There are videos, some of them are contentious, but showing them appearing within seconds, lights flying around the fields. You've got biological anomalies occurring in the plants. But a lot of scientific tests, strange chemical imbalances in the soil, all kinds of things, incredible geometry. But no, they're all made by a bloke with a bit of wood and a piece of string. That's what we're told. And some are. Don't get me wrong. Some are man-made. Absolutely. Right? It's not a problem. To me, I kind of almost at the point now where I don't care on one level because they're still archetypal symbols projecting into the collective, aren't they? Why these symbols, why now? But then the other side of me does care because I don't like them being misrepresented. If anybody tells you they are 100% explained, well, they are not. If they say that, ask, well, what's your evidence? And I go, oh, yeah, because I read it in the paper. And that will be their evidence, right? You look at the evidence for crop circles, and there are many that are very, very hard to explain away. Now, are they made by an alien intelligence, some interdimensional intelligence? Do we project them? There's a lot of interesting experiments out there where shapes have appeared which people have requested. There might be something very strange and complex going on here. However, many of them may also be man-made. But that's not really the point that I want to make today. The point that I want to make today is that these also have been edited out of society. So the general view, when you show people these, is, oh yeah, but they all finished in the 90s, didn't they? Did they? Well, let me show you, in the next few slides, some crop circles from the last couple of summers. So we'll start last summer, 2018. So here we go. Here's some crop circles. They're doing quite well. Something doesn't exist anymore. Here's a few more. Some are in England, some are in other countries. You don't get many over here, it must be said, but there's been occasional ones. So it's doing quite well, isn't it, for something that apparently doesn't happen anymore. So let me bring you up to date. Here are some from this summer, just gone. So here's France had a very good year this year. There's a couple of French ones there. It is global, but for some reason England is, no question, the heartland. Here's a few more. So this is going on a huge scale, and yet nobody knows about it. I can talk to most people, and I give talks to all kinds of groups, not just alternative groups, but just everyday groups, and nearly always I go, wow, I didn't know that was still happening. No, because nobody reports them anymore. And if they do, it will be just to ridicule them. So that's something else that's now edited out, and people are told, no, it was all explained away, you don't need to look at them. And then you look at the evidence, and it's not explained away. It isn't explained away at all. What they've done, though, whether you think that they are from over there, or just a bloke with a plank, they've made people think. They've sent people down a rabbit hole of inquiry, as I did, where you never quite ever get to the end of it. And every layer you uncover just uncovers more questions, and you wind up just not knowing really what to think. Now, if you can embrace that and be comfortable with the mystery, you'll go somewhere. And they've inspired me. But other people kind of hit the wall and they don't know what to do with it and go a bit mad. Maybe I did. But here I am. What came out of it for me, though, was, irrespective of opinions, the media, even in my first year of doing this, and that was nearly, 29 years ago now, in my first year of doing that, the media were lying. I knew, hang on, what they're saying here, that's not true. I know it's not true. I've been on TV programmes where they're saying things that are not true, even whatever you think about them. So this is the problem. They are being misrepresented. And some of it seems to be knowing. They must knowingly know what they're saying is absolute crap. So, okay, how does the mainstream media treat the paranormal then? Let's call this the paranormal. It's not explained. Well, okay, here's the mainstream kind of take on it. The X-Files was a very good programme, actually, and it ran for years, didn't it? And it got revived a year or two ago. When it came out in, I think, 93, it kind of really increased interest in the paranormal. It opened a door, and for a while, it was being taken seriously, and then, that kind of wore off, and we got into different times. But the X-Files continued on for a while. What many people don't realise, though, is that Chris Carter, who created the X-Files, wove into the stories real claims. So he used things that people really did believe were happening. What he thought is unclear. Some have come up with the conspiracy view that he's really trying to tell the world what's really going on. Well, maybe, but it did touch on certain truths. And we'll see one thing later on that the X-Files did manage to predict that did indeed come true. So the world is comfortable with the paranormal when it comes to things like this, if it's in a fictional guise. But then when you try and say, yeah, but maybe it's not fiction, then you hit this kind of wall of, oh, no, I can't accept that. Unless you yourself have had a paranormal experience. Out of interest, how many in this room think they've had some kind of paranormal experience they can't really explain? Go on, hands up. Well, there you go. I would say it's over half of you. But you're all nutters. Well, it's true. That's the attitude we get, isn't it? Right. OK, well, there we are. So we're unveiling another layer of reality here. But that's not acknowledged, is it, in the mainstream? OK, so let's move forward. The mainstream will allow certain mystery areas to be discussed. And it's usually because they think they've got a reasonable explanation. One thing that you do hear about is the Bermuda Triangle. Channel 5 is very fond of discussing the Bermuda Triangle. It fills a couple of hours, doesn't it? So, if you're not aware, this is, of course, an area, would you believe, near Bermuda, where over the years many, ships have vanished or aeroplanes. Now, there are some myths around it. Some tales are not true, but some tales are true. And it does look above statistical chance we're getting vessels of one kind or another vanishing. Some have claimed missing time. They've come back from a flight and it's like they've been gone days, but to them, it doesn't seem very long. So there's many strange things around it. However, the Channel 5 type programmes you watch will always say, yeah, but there's a very reasonable explanation for this. And indeed, they will point out that there are strange weather patterns in that part of the world where you get these kind of big holes appearing in the cloud. This is true, and they create very severe downdrafts. So yes, that might explain some of the crashes and some of the disappearances, things getting sucked down under the water. It might well do. But then there's things that they don't really explain, like the missing time examples, for instance. So you've got a kind of a grey area there, but because it seems like the reasonable explanation, it's all right. We're allowed to talk about the Bermuda Triangle. So, OK, there's a good example of an unexplained mystery that seems kind of curious, but it's not threatening in any way. There's another example like this, but it's worth a quick discussion. And that's the subject of cryptozoology, i.e. the study of strange creatures. So things like Bigfoot and the Yeti, which may or may not look like that. These strange, shaggy creatures are seen around the world. You get the Sasquatch in Canada. So they're generally big, sort of ape-like things, or maybe not quite ape-like. We'll see that in a minute. And you've probably seen the famous film of Bigfoot, haven't you? And of course the skeptics say, well, it's a man in a gorilla suit. Although that's never been proved, I have to say. There's various arguments about it. But then you find there are lots of other sightings of Bigfoot and some quite interesting bits of film. Some are more reliable than others. But it might surprise you to learn, surprisingly well-known people have believed in, especially the Yeti. That's said to live in the Himalayas. Sir Edmund Hillary, the famous explorer, for instance, was firmly convinced the Yeti existed. And somebody, that I'm sure even over here you will know, who has been on a number of expeditions to find the Yeti, and this might surprise you, is the actor Brian Blessed. Brian Blessed? That Brian Blessed, you know the guy. Right, big, bumbling, huge kind of actor, a very big character. He actually really believes in the Yeti. Now, some years ago, we used to have a chat show in England called the Esther Ransom Show, or Esther, or whatever it was, and I was on that once. And he was on as well. And I had a long chat with him, and in between the swearing, I realised this guy really takes this seriously. And, you know, he's absolutely convinced it's real. Now, he and other people that have visited the sites where the Yeti have been collecting fur from alleged samples. So people have been trying to work out, who is the Yeti? What is the Yeti? One theory says that Brian actually is the Yeti. But there's another theory as well. One of the labs in the last few years has been analysing the DNA from the fur, and they declared about 3 or 4 years ago they think the Yeti is real, but that what it is an unusual species of bear rather than an ape. And it's a cross, in their view, between a grizzly bear and a polar bear. So there's probably not that many of them, but you think, oh, OK, so this might explain the sightings. And, OK, it's not an alien or a monster, but there's something. And people are trying to give context to what they're seeing. So you often find in the world of mysterious research grey areas. And it's not quite one thing and not quite the other, but it's not nothing either. So that's quite interesting. And, of course, in the British Isles, we have another famous mystery creature that's worth a brief mention, the Loch Ness Monster. Now, start talking about the Loch Ness Monster and you'll have fun, but nobody really takes it seriously. But then you look at the evidence, and then you find there are sightings, again, going back centuries. Surprisingly, sensible scientific people have been convinced that the Loch Ness Monster exists. Here is one of the famous photographs. Now, you'll always be told, well, yeah, but that's a known hoaxed photograph. Except there are some people that believe the hoax story is the hoax. I mean, how do you know? And actually, you don't know 9 times out of 10. You've got to decide what feels right. So how do you get to the bottom of this? Talking of getting to the bottom of things, recently they've been taking DNA from the water. And this new study reckons that it's giant eels, which might explain some of the sightings, but maybe not all. In 1975, a submarine went down into Loch Ness, and it managed to photograph that. And there's a few other images of this object. Now, the skeptics say, yeah, but it's driftwood or something. Maybe. But then others say, yeah, but you know what? That doesn't half look like a plesiosaur, which, of course, we all assume died out with the dinosaurs 65 million years ago or so. But could it be a prehistoric species? It can't be one monster. It's got to be a whole family of them. Could it be that a species has survived from ancient times? Maybe not many of them. Well, actually, it could be possible. And one of the reasons it could be possible is because we have things like this. The coelacanth. Now, the coelacanth was for years a fossil of a fish believed to have died out around the time of the dinosaurs. Or at least we believed that until in the last 20 years or so, we've started to find them swimming around. And now we know the coelacanth is alive and well and has barely changed in 65 million years. Now, that says to me, you can't therefore rule out that there might not be some creature, family of them, somewhere in the depths of Loch Ness. It opens out to the sea. It's not a closed lake, so it's not impossible. I think we need to be more open-minded. There's a grey area, and it's often in the grey areas you find that's kind of where the truth lies. It's not quite one thing or the other, but it's not nothing again. So, okay, we're being quite light here, but let's just move on to another mystery, right, which, again, when you look at it, there's more to it than meets the eye. And that is the mystery of ghosts. Now, there's a whole talk that I do about ghosts because I'm fascinated by this. It's not talked about enough. Here are 2 famous claimed ghost photographs. A little girl maybe there. I don't know if they're real or not. They're just classic ghost photographs. But, of course, today, We live in a world of multiple cameras, don't we? CCTV is everywhere, the surveillance state. But they're also picking up ghosts surprisingly regularly, often from multiple cameras. Poltergeist activity is being picked up. And in the end, you look at the amount of this film that's coming through and you think, this cannot all be fraud. Because we're told, it's just people having a laugh, Photoshop. But then you find there are too many witnesses. It's just too much of it. So that's an interesting one, because these are visual records of these things. So you I don't know if you get it here, but in England we get Radio 4. And Radio 4 is listened to by a lot of people. And it's seen by many as kind of basically the truth. The BBC, the truth. Anyway, and you will always have people on saying ghosts, of course they don't exist. It's in the mind. People like to believe in these things. It's probably hallucination or oxygen starvation to the brain and all this. And you think, yeah, but hang on a minute. It doesn't explain the images, number one. And it doesn't explain how, very often, several different people will see the same ghost in the same place at completely different times, never knowing that anybody else had ever seen that ghost. That's not one thing in one person's mind. That's not some, fault of the brain. That's a recurring phenomenon. And whether you think these things are spirits trapped between worlds, as of course some believe, or some strange crack in time replaying over and over, or maybe both and more, to just say that ghosts don't exist, to my view, is utter ignorance. They do. You can argue about what they are, yes. There will be a scientific explanation. But just to say, because it doesn't fit your narrow band of reality that you've declared they don't exist, is foolhardy. They are just ignoring masses of evidence. And right, in my personal experience, because I meet an awful lot of people, I've done thousands of talks over the last 30 years, and people come up at the end and they share things with me. I would say around 1 in 10 people have seen a ghost, or believe they've seen a ghost. That'll do. And okay, you can write maybe 2/3 of them off as mistakes or something, but then you hear stories you just cannot explain that way. And they're often sensible, qualified, professional people. They're not nutters. They're just everyday folk having experiences that they're trying to relate. But that is written off, again, in the mainstream. But look at the evidence. Before you say ghosts don't exist, look at the evidence. In my view, there's some overlapping reality here that we need to understand better. And whether it is proof of life after death, well, maybe we'll see one day. But there's something, it would seem. But you know what? It might turn out, of course, that you don't even need to be dead to be a ghost. Because I'm sure some of you in this room have had an experience like this. The out-of-body experience. Is anybody willing to say whether they've ever had an out-of-body experience? Yeah, loads of you.
It was horrible. I got frightened.
Yeah, no, some people don't like them. I mean, no, absolutely. Well, look, we'll talk at the end. We get Q&A time. If you want to share more, I'll just push on at the moment. But thank you. Thank you for being honest, because I meet, again, a lot of people that describe this. Now, some don't have good experiences. Others do. It varies. It's either often during sleep, but I also must say under a general anaesthetic. Whether it does something to us, the general anaesthetic, that makes that more likely, I don't know. So you're supposed to be out of it, but funnily enough, it's like you snap awake. It hasn't happened to me personally, but the people that have told me this. But they're often hovering a few feet up there, looking down on their own body. But they can't really be awake because, they're still down there. Some people in this state find they can waft through walls, they can go into other rooms, and they see things which they remember. And when they come back from these experiences, they will relate these to the doctors and the nurses, and they will say what they saw. And yet they're recording seeing things they could never have seen from lying down there on the slab. It's like they projected their consciousness. And some hospitals have found this is so common now. They're running experiments. Southampton in England is one of them. They're recording the amount of people that have this and leaving things up on high shelves and all of this. And it's amazing how many people know what's up there when you can't see it from the ground. So it looks like we're more than just flesh and blood. Would you believe? I mean, many of us know this, but it's interesting. It's a more kind of definite kind of evidence of that. I don't know, maybe death is just not coming back. Maybe. So, again, though, if you talk about this, the academics will say, no, it's all trick of the mind. But not all of them. I mean, there have been many tests over the years into various psychic phenomena, from telepathy to psychokinesis and whatnot, all of these areas. And actually, two of the bodies that know very well there's something going on here are the US military and the Russian military, because they have been spending a lot of money on this for a very long time, and you do not do that if you're not getting results. They, of course, are almost certainly trying to use it for their own dubious ends, but it goes to show that there's something here worth studying. So, okay, they don't want to shout too much about it, but then you can look at civilian studies that have gone public. One of the famous ones, or should be famous, took place at Princeton University. So these two professors, who were essentially skeptics when they began, Robert Jahn and Dean Radin, decided they kind of wanted to nail this kind of psychic phenomena thing. Was it real? Was it not real? Expecting pretty much to find it wasn't. So they did roughly 10 years of different experiments with hundreds of people doing different tests. And to their surprise, they had so many positive results that actually appeared to prove that psychic phenomena was real. They had to conclude, when they did a meta-analysis of all the data at the end of it, that the odds of all these positive results merely being chance were an incredible 35 trillion to 1 against. Now, if you know anything about statistics, if that was 1 million, oh, that would be impressive odds. 35 trillion is an almost unimaginable number, right? We can't even grasp that. So you think, well, that effectively proves it exists, doesn't it? So why don't we all walk around going, oh, I'm psychic, I am. Well, some of us do, don't we? But I reckon most of us have had an experience where the phone rings, and you know who's ringing before you even picked up the receiver, yeah? Yeah, there's a lot of nodding heads. But we write it out, and we go, oh, it must be coincidence. Actually, when you look at the amount of people it happens to and how often it is, it can't be coincidence. So on a very low level, we all know that there's something going on. But edited out of society, because you never hear about these studies, and that's just one. There are many others. Who do you hear from regularly in the media? These are the folk you hear about. Richard Dawkins, Brian Cox, right? Robert Winston. Now, these are big in England anyway. And a guy called Professor Chris French, who's always on the telly, basically telling you that if you believe in something weird, you're a bit weird, basically. No, I quite like Chris French. I've appeared at conferences with him, but I think he's wrong, because he just basically just dismisses any experience, and worse, will not engage with the evidence. At a conspiracy conference, famously, when he was asked, well, yeah, but what about the evidence for conspiracies, which he doesn't believe in? He always says, oh, this is not the time to discuss evidence. But if you don't discuss the evidence, you can't have a meaningful conversation. But anyway, but these people have enormous influence on the media. So these are the ones that we hear about, and the ones that are getting the other information, you don't, because it doesn't suit, for some reason, the agenda that the media and the wider authorities have clearly set. The authorities and the mainstream media are two sides of the same coin. They might expose each other occasionally to a degree, but essentially they're the same coin. And let's be very clear about this. Let me show you, though, how this edits things out. Now, here's a good example of how this, therefore, works out. Here we see a head modelled on the skull of Richard III. Do you remember this 3 or 4 years ago? Yeah. So Richard III, his body had been missing for years. Now, there were kind of clues about where it roughly might be, but this lady on the left, Philippa Langley, she was instrumental in finding the body of Richard III. So she says, right, and if you watch the original documentary, she says this very clearly. She was led to the exact spot by a psychic intuition. And she was right. Funnily enough, it was in a car park, directly under a big letter R painted. It was, this is true. And they dug down, and there he was. But of course, that was hugely embarrassing to all the white-coated academics who want to talk about bones. And now, right, watch a modern documentary about how they found Richard III. Spot the difference. And the difference is poor old Philippa, she's been shuffled off to the edges. You might briefly see her. You will not hear about her psychic intuition. You will not hear about her very big role in finding the body. She's an embarrassment, so she's been written out of it. And that to me says, hang on a minute, right, hang on, because even if you say that psychic phenomena doesn't exist and she's wrong, I want to know that that's why she believes that she found the body of Richard III. It doesn't have to be true or not. I want to hear it. But no, like I said in the first talk, no, you mustn't have that discussion anymore. What I find really notable, though, is right when the world of academia, which I'm not knocking per se, they do wonderful things, but it's the attitude that's problematic. When they get something wrong, they never apologise. When somebody on the outside of their world gets something wrong, well, they go in for the attack, don't they? We'd been told when they got the skeleton, right, we're going to reconstruct Richard. We're going to show you what he looks like. And be warned, he won't look anything like the old Tudor paintings. But actually, he looked quite a lot like the old Tudor paintings. And he had the twist in his spine, all things that have been denied by many people for many years. But nobody apologised and the world moved on. Had Philippa got that wrong, we'd never heard the end of it, I'm sure. So do you see the imbalance that we have here? So on a daily basis, whole stories are being edited out. That's why you don't hear about Philippa, you don't hear about crop circles, you don't hear about spirals in the sky, and a long list of other things you don't hear about, because it doesn't suit the agenda of the media. So now, right, we've gone from paranormal mysteries into the realm of cover-ups, okay? And of course, the minute you get into saying there must be a cover-up, you are a conspiracy theorist. Well, so what? I mean, last year I addressed this. If you came last year, if somebody calls me a conspiracy theorist, I'm going to take it like the Quakers did. When the Quaker was accused of being a Quaker, that was a term of abuse. But in the end, they went, all right, we're Quakers. And they went, oh, and it completely diffused the criticism. There are conspiracies in the world. And sometimes we don't know the whole truth, so we have to theorise about them. So I'm a conspiracy theorist. Right, so what? Right, end of the debate. Right, let's get that out of the way. So, all right, cover-ups, conspiracies, here we go. How can you absolutely demonstrate that there is a cover-up? Because I know we often feel this innately, but proving it's another matter. Well, one area where I think you can fairly show that there is a cover-up is the area of UFOs. Now, I'm not saying that's a real picture. I don't know. I'm just using it as a classic UFO picture. All right. Again, it's a bit like ghosts, right? I have met so many people. Often pilots, military and commercial, soldiers, policemen, sensible, qualified personnel who've told me at the end of a talk they've seen things like that. And they all say the same thing, which is, yeah, but you shut up if you want to keep your job. And I've heard that so many times. It's not worth reporting them because then you'll go under psychological analysis, you'll probably lose your job eventually. So they say, we just don't say anything. But believe me, these are being seen on a regular, daily basis. Classic, flying saucers. Are they alien? Is it military? Is it a hybrid of both? Maybe more, maybe something else. But to say there's nothing flying around, I think is truly delusional. But this goes back a long way. So you all know of Roswell, even if you don't know the full story of Roswell. So, I mean, okay, let's take this as a good example. In 1947, one day, the Roswell Daily Record, and Roswell is a town in New Mexico in North America, suddenly announces that the local military have captured a flying saucer. So that's quite a claim, isn't it? And here's a mock-up image showing what got reported. It's not real, but it's kind of the classic disc crashed into the desert and these grey alien bodies lying nearby. We'll look at them in a minute. So, journalists start to show up at Roswell, of course. Word goes round and people are flying into Roswell demanding to see their flying saucer. So in the end, the authorities have to send out this man to meet them, Major Jesse Marcel, and he holds a press conference and shows the journalists fragments of a weather balloon. And they say that's all it was that came down, a weather balloon. Well, if you're wondering why Major Marcel looks a bit sheepish there, that's because he knew it was a lie. Because when he retired, he became one of a number of Roswell whistleblowers. And they've all backed each other up, and they've all said, what we witnessed, right, in their opinion, was extraterrestrial. And they said, whatever it wasn't a weather balloon. Then, as the years went by, they tried to change it. Then they said, oh, well, all right, it wasn't a weather balloon. It was a device for detecting Soviet atomic tests. And then that changed. But what, of course, had never been explained by all these theories were the alien bodies. Now, that's from a movie about Roswell. Now, listen, there is very contentious, claimed real footage of Roswell. We won't go there today. But this is what got reported. And people, right, every day around the world still claim they meet these kinds of beings. Small, grey beings, humanoid, these dark almond eyes. OK, and there's variations on that, but these are quite common. So there were doctors and nurses that witnessed these because they were, worried about the bodies going off in the sun. So rather than go back to the military base, they took them to the civilian hospital So there are civilian staff that remember seeing the bodies. So then realising as the years went by that the cover story hadn't really explained this, literally only about 25 years ago, the US military released a statement saying, oh yes, the alien bodies, well, all they were crash test dummies. Now, I don't know about you, I like to believe, God forbid, if I'm taken into a hospital, the staff know the difference between a body and a crash test dummy. But apparently they don't. This is what we're dealing with. This is a level of delusion that we're dealing with here. So it begins to smack a cover-up, doesn't it? Now, listen, there are many, many tales of Roswell. Some are untrue, probably. Some may well be true, probably. We're not going to resolve that today. But something's going on. So, of course, the world of conspiracy thinking, and we did all that last year, but believes that the craft was taken here. So this is the famous Area 51, which is a real military test zone in Nevada. And years ago, when you could get nearer than you can today, people filmed objects flying over these runways, performing all kinds of acrobatics that our craft don't normally do. And then when they realised people were seeing too much, they pushed back the boundaries. You won't get near it now. But there are whistleblowers like Bob Lazar, controversial figure, who's claimed that he's worked there. Now, he's just managed to prove recently he really did work there, because for years the authorities denied it, but apparently he did. And he says absolutely they've got hangars packed with extraterrestrial equipment and alien bodies, and so who knows what they're doing. So one theory is they are reverse engineering this technology to create modern military technology. And some say that's how stealth technology was developed, by trying to copy what they're finding in the craft. And of course, some say they're much more advanced than we know. They just haven't announced it yet. There's no question that strange things fly around in our airspace. If anybody tells you these things don't exist, tell them what's your evidence for that, because they've clearly not looked at the data. Unquestionably, there's something very, very strange going on here. Okay, so are they alien? Is it military? Again, is it some other weird thing altogether? But let's just look at that thing of, is there a cover-up? Well, okay, so some people have tried to use the Freedom of Information Act to see if they can get documents released about UFOs. Now, here's the good news. When compelled to, authorities will release documents about UFOs. The bad news is when they do, that's what you get. Clever, isn't it? So, in the interest of national security, they are allowed to redact or cover up, literally, anything they don't want you to see about a subject they then tell you doesn't exist. Well, what do you think? There's no question there's a cover-up going on here. And I mean, there are leading people who have come forward. The ex-Canadian Defence Minister, Paul Hellyer, has said, right, in his view, from what he saw, the US is definitely in contact with ETs. The Mexican Air Force has said this is a real phenomenon. But of course, they don't make the mainstream news, do they? And so it's just dismissed as maverick madness. There's something going on. So if we can't get the authorities to be honest about it, all right, what do? We have to listen, therefore, to civilian testimony. Thousands of people every year claim they get taken on board spaceships, they meet aliens. There's some famous cases, some are less famous, but there are repeating themes to this. I mean, one of them is these weird operations. Sometimes they're extracting genetic material. Sometimes there's a kind of a strange psychosexual sort of element to it. But there are repeating things. And one other one that we'll come to in a second. Are all these people mad? Maybe not. I mean, there have been a number of studies over the years. A famous one was by Professor John Mack, who was a Harvard psychiatrist, and he decided to look into this and took a lot of stick for doing so, right? People thought the guy had gone mad, but he said, no, I just want to understand why people are saying that they've met aliens. So he put hundreds of people under hypnotic regression, psychological analysis, and at the end of it, he just had to conclude they were not all mad, which is what we're told. There's something wrong with their brains. He said that's simply not what he found, and that most of them are just trying to relate something that to them felt real. And he had to conclude, look, whether it really is happening or it's just happening in a realm of mind, it almost doesn't matter. This is real for them. And therefore, the archetypal experiences they describe should be listened to. This is something coming through the collective. Again, like crop circles. You want to argue whether they're man-made? All right, whatever. Something's still coming through the collective. It has power and meaning. But the other interesting thing that keeps coming out of this, now we shift gear right into another realm. These creatures are very fond of making prophecies. And they're very fond of saying to people, right, this is what's going to happen to your world over the next few years. Now, people like John King and Whitley Strieber have written down things that they were told, these acclaimed abductees, and they've watched many of them come true. And the overriding theme, which keeps coming up again and again, is that our world is about to change massively. And the turning point, the beginning of all of this, and Helen alluded to this earlier, would be the year 2012. And there have been a lot of fuss, of course, over the last few years about 2012. But many abductees have said that's the beginning of the change, which will ultimately be really good, but it's going to be really unsettling as we go through it. So that takes us into another realm, because there are other unexplained mysteries that have this prophetic element to it, which again, you are not going to hear about in the mainstream. Let's go back in time even further. At the beginning of the 20th century, you get a series of apparitions at a place called Fatima. Now, here we are in Ireland. You've had many apparitions of religious figures, but often the Virgin Mary. Okay. So the Fatima case, though, is unusual in as much as there are many witnesses to it. So these 3 shepherd children, they claim they met, first of all, an angel, and then a glowing female being they believed to be the Virgin Mary. So she started to give them information and told them things that would happen. Now, it was all very esoteric, but the general interpretation was one secret of Fatima was a prediction of the Second World War. This was during the First, of course. Well, that came true. The second was a prediction of the Cold War and the rise of communism. That's how it was interpreted anyway. Well, that came true. And the third, secret of Fatima, now that was kept very quiet by the Vatican for a long time. And yet the man who would eventually become Pope Benedict XVI, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, was very vocal. And he told a number of people the last secret of Fatima is all about huge change due to occur kind of now, where we are today. But of course, then when he became Pope, he wouldn't say anything more. And a lot of people wonder, well, what else does he know that he doesn't want to say anything about? Now, so skeptics say, yeah, but they were kids. They made it all up, didn't they? Did they? I don't think they did. And the reason I don't, I'm not coming in with a religious agenda here. We're just being real about the events, okay? There's too much evidence to say that something extraordinary happened. I mean, if you go to one of the side chapels, and they don't shout about this, by the way, but one of the side chapels at Fatima has a window commemorating the miracle of the sun, where thousands of people claimed they witnessed what they believed to be the sun whizzing around the sky, performing acrobatics, doing incredible things the sun doesn't normally do. So again, you could put this down to delusion, as some have, or, mass hysteria. But it's very hard to do that when not only have you got hundreds of written accounts of it, even from non-religious people, but you also have photographs of the event. There's the object, filmed allegedly from a few miles away. Looks like an eclipsed sun there. Well, no eclipse was due that day. Clearly it wasn't the sun, by the way, or the whole world would have noticed. But something was in the sky. Here are the people who are waiting. They've been told to gather for a miracle. This was a way of convincing the people that the kids were telling the truth. You'll notice up there, they've got their umbrellas up. That's possibly notable. In many stories that are connected with the paranormal, there's a weird thing about water drying up. The very last thing this object did, was suddenly vanish over the horizon. This is how weird this was. And it suddenly came back over the horizon and swept low over the heads of the by now terrified crowd who thought this was the end of the world, as you would. As it did so, it had been raining really heavily, hence the brollies, and there were big puddles on the ground, everybody was getting soaked. The pass of this object suddenly dried everything. Bang! The puddles fizzled in steam, the clothes were dry in an instant, like that, and the rain stopped. That is of note, because some people who've claimed to have stood near UFOs have described water suddenly drying up. Don't know why it does it, it's something they do. And that's got a connotation. Because if that got reported today, that would go down as a major UFO sighting. That doesn't rule out the Virgin Mary. I can't speak for that. It doesn't rule that out. But there's also a connotation of UFO activity here. And again, you're back to the element of prophecy, because this was all about predicting change. Now, on that score, briefly, back to crop circles. Over the years, a number of crop circles have plainly pointed out this ancient cycle of time embedded into many calendars, most famously the Maya, but other ancient calendars too. The cycle of time was 5,125 years. And the prophecies were, when that cycle ended and began again, as it did on December the 21st, 2012, hence some of the fuss about the end of the world that year, that it would herald the beginning of a huge time of change, rather maybe than the end of the world. What, can you really argue there's been no big change since 2012? I think there was something to it. And I think we're now in a time of huge change. It's just that many people were hoping it would ascend them all in 1 minute. But as I said in the earlier talk, life's not like that, is it? We've got to do the work. If you want to be truly enlightened, you've got to take the path. If you're just given it, well, you might as well be like a robot and be programmed, you know? So I think we are in a process of huge change. And it's just interesting to see that the crop circles were one of the first things to point this cycle out. And now here we are living in the new era today. So what did the ancients know that we forgot? Because some believe that they were given knowledge from somewhere. Some believe they were observing wider solar cycles. We'll come back to that, right? But others say, what if they were actually given knowledge? And of course, you've got the whole ancient aliens theories. That mankind was visited long ago and that our development was kick-started. You know, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, it uses that as its main theme. I mean, a wonderful film if you've never seen it. So one of the first people to wonder, you know, whether or not we had interacted with aliens was famously Erich von Däniken, who's still alive. Right, he's in his 90s. He's still going today. His best-selling book, Chariots of the Gods, in the 60s, was an absolute storm. And, okay, listen, he's given a hard time by the world of academia, and he may not be right about everything. I'm not saying that. But he was the first person to reasonably ask, look, some of the ancient drawings and carvings, it looks like they're trying to describe modern technology, but they haven't got the context for it, so they're turning them into gods and symbols. And to be fair to him, some of the questions were worth asking. I mean, what were the Nazca lines, as well as the swirly pattern ones and animals? Were they runways? Worth asking the question, who knows? And he rightly pointed out, some cave paintings and that, they do not look like the aliens that people claim they see today. So we can't, I think, rule out that we perhaps were visited long ago. Now, of course, from these kinds of beliefs, you get a famous conspiracy theory. There are many myths and legends around the world of a race of something interbreeding with mankind and giving birth to a hybrid. So the Anunnaki legends, for instance, seem to describe that. The book of Genesis, chapter 6, has this tale of the sons of God, who in biblical tradition were a race of giants, coming down, interbreeding with mankind and giving birth to the Nephilim, right, the hybrid race. And it clearly says that they were the heroes of old and days gone by, but clearly says they carried on being so. And some believe that's basically saying we were interfered with on a genetic level by creatures and that we, or some of us, carry some kind of hybrid gene. And of course, the conspiracy theory is, for those that haven't heard this, that the main carrier of it is generally the ruling elite, but in particular the British royal family, who are, of course, in reality, reptilian aliens. So you will know this. So if you know David Icke, you've heard this, right? And that various prime ministers and presidents carry the gene. Now, that's been used as a stick to beat the whole alternative world with, because, well, if you believe that rubbish, you believe anything. But that's not entirely fair. Now, look, David Icke has been right about many things, by the way. You know, not about everything, but he's certainly been right about many things. So he's entitled to his view. Maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. But let's just look at this from a sideways angle. There's no question, even if you don't talk about extraterrestrial bloodlines, right? There's no question bloodlines matter to the rich and powerful. I mean, whole wars have been fought over bloodlines. Of course they have, especially in the British Isles. You know this. And it's also true that many world leaders turn out to be related. Right? Now, old royal families used to be, of course, especially across Europe. But even today, it turns out world leaders often have blood links that you don't know. I mean, most presidents of the United States have strong genealogical links to the British royal family, including, some say, Trump. Now, I've never checked that out, but it's possible. So maybe you only get to be in a position of power if you are of the right stock. And even if it's not an extraterrestrial bloodline, maybe there's a metaphor in this belief. And I mean, here's another thing. What is true is that signs and symbols from the ancient past still are used as symbols of power today. Ask a Freemason. They use ancient Egyptian symbolism still to denote power. So let's just take one symbol. I mean, there's stone needles and all of that are all over the world in powerful places. But let's just look at the pyramid for a minute. So you get the famous Egyptian pyramids. Some believe they were made using knowledge from a former civilization, a lost civilization. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, whatever. But they lost the art. But the idea of this, what it represented, got spread around the world. There are pyramids in India, China, Vietnam. They might be different kinds, but they're the same concept coming back again and again. Many centuries later, of course, you get the Mayan Pyramids. So this is something that keeps coming back to us. And of course, and I talked about this last year, if you live in America, you've got a pyramid in your pocket, probably, because the dollar bill has the Great Seal of America on it. This is the Eye of Providence. It was a Masonic symbol founded in 1776, and it represents the divine being at the top, they say, looking over the then 13 states of America. That's what it represents. But of course, then the conspiracy view is, oh, it's all very sinister. It's the all-seeing eye, and it's got us trapped in the pyramid below, which I'm sure it has. But you don't know you're in the pyramid unless you can see it from the outside, of course. But okay, let's just keep going with pyramids. We keep making them. The Louvre in Paris, glass pyramids, for no very good reason. Canary Wharf Tower, right, near Greenwich in London, the heart of our financial centre, has a big glass pyramid on the top of it. But what you might not know is the following. Now, it is said, I haven't been up there with a tape measure, all right, but it is said that if you extend the angles of the pyramid down and imagine them then meeting the ground level of the tower, it then gives you the exact dimensions of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And if that's true, that is not an accident. It's either an architectural in-joke, or again, they're linking modern power with ancient power. So I don't believe that this happens for nothing. Drive around London, probably Dublin too, but London especially. Look up at the buildings. The symbolism woven into the stonework, it's so blatant. It's letting you know basically who's really in charge and the symbols that they believe give them power. And did you enjoy the London Olympics of 2012? Did you spot the symbolism? I mean, here's just one thing. So many thought this was really interesting. The strange mascots with a single eye over the pyramidal body. Well, it does look rather like the Eye of Providence, doesn't it? Even the lighting gantries at the London Stadium, they follow the same proportions as the Eye of Providence. Coincidence? Probably not. I mean, remember, right, and this is a point I now want to come to, the powers that be clearly have esoteric knowledge and deep interest in the occult. So they're going to be more than aware of all the prophecies and all the 2012 stuff, more probably than the average person, which is why they don't want us to know. And they knew everybody would be looking at the telly, wherever you are in the world, for the London Olympics in 2012, at that gateway to the new era. So was it that they were seeding their signs and symbols subliminally, right, just to let us know on some deep level who's really in charge? You can't put it past them, can you? But other symbols recur, and one, and I know I talked about this briefly last year, but I want to come at it from a different angle today, is the owl. Owls pop up in a few ancient things, but modern secret societies, and when I say modern, here's one founded in the Victorian era. They like owls. The Bohemian Club, for those that don't know, was founded in California in the late 1800s. And it originally was for artisans, but soon it attracted a world following of like prime ministers and presidents and important industrialists, you know, people that mattered. And so they would do this ritual once a year called the Cremation of Care, where they would sacrifice the effigy of a child to a giant stone owl. So nothing to worry about there. Here's the thing, right? So some people say, well, yes, but you know, they did weird things in the Victorian times. As most of you in this room probably know, this is still going on today, every year at Bohemian Grove. And the problem with this is, right, it's not denied, right? No one denies it. Bill Clinton famously joked about it in a speech. But it's not talked about either, because what they say is we're a secret society, mind your own business. Right? In a world, whereas we all know there are horrible claims of satanic rings, paedophile rings, all the rest of it, if nothing else, surely sacrificing effigies of children to a giant stone owl is in poor taste. But they say, oh, it's just a pageant, just a kind of jokey thing. Well, in case you're wondering, we do know it's real. I mean, John Ronson, the Guardian journalist and author, he broke into the Bohemian Grove compound with Alex Jones, and they filmed the Cremation of Care ceremony. You can still just about watch it on YouTube. I'm sure it won't be there for long. But it's funny, but you can't talk about it publicly. John Ronson was on, do you get this? Have I Got News for You? Comedy programme. So he was on that about 2 years ago, and he started to try and talk about what he saw at Bohemian Grove. And he's essentially a skeptic, but he can't deny what he saw. And nobody joked about it. Paul Merton, Ian Hislop, they just looked down and nobody picked it up. You can tell that you don't go there. The mainstream's not going to expose it. And that's just one secret society with deep occult links. Obviously, there's a million others. Kappa Phi Beta, Skull and Bones, and so on and so forth. So that's the problem, isn't it? But you've also got a religious agenda. So what we're noticing now is, right, all the esoteric things, all the mystery realms we are told not to be interested in, they're interested in them. They love them. They can't get enough of it. And especially in America, you've had the rise of the religious right who are waiting for the rapture. So this is where people believe they will be bodily lifted up into the heavens. Not so different from the New Age Ascensionist movement. There are kind of links there, but this is in a very Christian context. This is not in the Bible, right? It's very much a modern invention. People have brought a number of phrases of the Bible together to create this belief in the rapture. But the problem is, many leading US politicians believe the rapture is going to happen, but they've got a problem because you can't have the rapture until the final battle of Armageddon has been fought. So all these people in positions of power with their fingers and thumbs on the button, could it be that really they actually want war? Because they can't have this marvellous rapture until they have a massive Armageddon-type war. I mean, you know, maybe this is going too far, but you have to wonder what runs through their heads, don't you? Because they certainly don't seem to run the world for peace, when sometimes they could do. And, I mean, this is very rife. I mean, we'll go on about Trump, but find out more about Mike Pence, right? He appears not to be somebody very hands-on. Pence is deeply religious. Now, he's entitled to that view. I'm not criticising anybody's belief. That's fine. But if you're going to be running the world and you don't declare that that belief is motivating your policies, that's not fair on everyone else. Trump, right, some say, right, is the fall guy. That sooner or later they know he's going to get impeached, it's all going to collapse, and in will step this ultra-right-wing rapturite who believes we're living in the end times. Well, let's hope he doesn't try to bring them about, eh? And don't think it would have been much different under Hillary Clinton, because she's also got similar beliefs. And all of these are tied together by The Family. Have you heard about The Family? It's quite a good Netflix series which exposes it, which is, again, this very Christian organisation in America that basically has tendrils amongst all the politicians. So even if they say they don't believe it, they're working to a religious agenda, which is fine, but let's put it in the open so we know who we're dealing with. So they have deep esoteric beliefs. But when we start to get interested in the esoteric, we're told, no, it's all a load of rubbish. You're all nutters for believing in that. And I think it's because they want to keep it for themselves. While we're about it, I mean, you know, if you are new to this, check out groups like this, the Bilderbergs, they're very famous now, the Trilateral Commission. Power lies in these unelected, undemocratic quangos with enormous power over parliaments around the world. Vote for who you want in an election, but these people are always going to be somewhere there in the background, and many others we could list, right? And that's taken us into the realm of conspiracy theory, the belief that we are puppets of ruling elites, which clearly we are, unless we wake up and cut the strings. And that's the problem, you know, like the people living in the village, too many people don't want to cut the strings because then they're going to have to think for themselves. We have to wake them up from that. So all of this brings us to big question marks about everything, about the way the world is run. That's why people believe in conspiracy theories, and rightly so. And, you know, we've covered this in other guises before. If you've not seen me speak about conspiracy theories, check it out. It's still on YouTube but it never gets recommended anymore. It's actually nearly 1 million views. And just as it was going to get to 1 million views, you won't find it unless you really know the URL now. But it will give you the background to some of this. Okay, so if you look at mainstream cover-ups that have been exposed, from Hillsborough, which was the football stadium disaster in Liverpool, of course, weapons of mass destructions, MPs' expense scandals, military atrocities, Jimmy Savile, these are cover-ups, right? If somebody ever tells you, oh, there's no cover-ups, they are. This got mentioned yesterday. I mean, Jimmy Savile, for instance, right, alleged conspiracy websites had named him as a paedophile years before this broke surface. And it turns out they were right. But have you ever noticed, when it finally breaks surface, they always reclassify it. They never call it a conspiracy or a cover-up. They just call it a scandal. Clever, isn't it? Because then they don't have to admit that conspiracies do exist. So this kind of stuff, over the years, has been touched on by the X-Files. But of course, people watch the X-Files and other programmes like it and go, yeah, that's just entertainment, isn't it? And that's the clever thing. All these areas we're talking about today, they just say, yeah, but it's fiction. You don't take it seriously. You enjoy it as entertainment. That's all. But is it just entertainment? The truth is out there. Used to be the slogan of the X-Files. Well, yes, it is. But you've got to look for it a bit. And there was a brief spin-off series from the X-Files called The Lone Gunmen. Well, these two, or three rather, strange conspiracy theorists kind of go around the world trying to investigate more that end of it. And of course, rather famously in one of the episodes, an aeroplane is hijacked by remote control and flown towards the World Trade Center 9 months before it actually happened. And then when it did actually happen, George Bush and co. said, whoa, we could never have imagined that happening, which is why we did nothing to stop it. We could have watched it on the telly a few months before. So I'm afraid sometimes life imitates art. Sometimes, though, art imitates life. Back to more paranormal stuff, right? The Men in Black, silly movies, they're quite funny. But of course, they are based on a real idea. If you've seen a UFO or an alien or something paranormal, and you start blabbing very loudly about it, the Men in Black might turn up. Now, in the movies, it is very easy, right? As we'll show in a minute, how they operate. Here is alleged CCTV of real Men in Black. Right, okay, that'll do. So they're very polite. They're quite sinister. Some people wonder, are they aliens in their own right? They're a bit odd. But they can appear in your house without you even knowing how they got in, right? And they're just very sinister. And they'll come up to you kind of quietly but intensely and say, that thing that you say you saw, you never saw it, did you? And you will never speak again to anybody about it, ever will you? And of course, by the end, you're, oh, great way of shutting people up, eh? Now, in the movies, yeah, it's very easy. They don't need to do that. They just flash this device at you and you forget everything. Your memory is wiped. But you know, some people believe that is exactly what's going on every single day, in the mass media especially. Our memories are being wiped all the time. Why don't you remember spirals in the sky? Why do people think crop circles died out years ago? Where's Philippa Langley? And so on and so forth. Well, you don't notice because we're all sucked into this, reading about Pippa Middleton and Angelina Jolie or whoever, which is much more exciting and fun, isn't it? And poor old Freddie Starr, English comedian, right, he died last year, no, this year, and all anybody remembered was that he once ate a hamster. He didn't eat a hamster, but it was a great headline, right? And we're entertained by this. We're sucked in. And suddenly for 2 days, no one's talking about the big stuff. They're talking about, did Freddie Starr eat a hamster? This is amazing stuff. You can't compete with it. This is class entertainment. But it's the classic conjurer's trick, of course. Because all the time, everybody's looking at that. Well, you're not looking at the stuff that matters. They make you look over there so you don't see what's going on in all the important corners. And perhaps to the likes of us here, it's obvious. Believe me, it's not obvious to people on the outside. That's why we've all got to go and do the work and wake them up to this. And if you doubt this, by the way, go and look at the shelves of W.H. Smith tomorrow. It's quite shocking what we fill our heads with much of the time. Okay, here's something that was an unexplained mystery for a long time, and it was utterly denied. People said, if you see a thunderstorm from a very, very long way away, it's really weird. It's like the space lightning going up from the clouds, up into space. And for years, scientists said, no, there isn't. That is impossible. You're drinking, you're a mad person. Until the likes of the space shuttle started to film them. And now we know it's a real phenomenon, visible over most thunderstorms, by the way, and we call them sprites today. So actually, it is a scientific phenomenon, believed impossible until we realised we had to come up with an explanation. More obscurely, but still interestingly, right, in the science of fluid dynamics, it had been declared you could never have a hexagon in the atmosphere of a planet. But then the Cassini craft flies to Saturn, and guess what? The biggest hexagon in the whole of the solar system. Believed impossible until the day that image was taken. So sometimes things we're told cannot be, cannot happen, or it turns out they do. But nobody ever apologises, of course. I find it really ironic. The people that we look up to as the founders of modern science, Copernicus, Galileo, all these people, right? In their day, were they seen as scientists? No. They were mavericks. Actually worse, heretics. They were the heretics of their day, believing ridiculous things like, what if the Earth went round the sun instead of the other way around? Well, who believed that? Oh, well, except for now we do, and it's just science, so yeah, we do believe it. So how do we know, therefore, that the things that are being dismissed today, especially in the paranormal realms, might not be the science of tomorrow? Because there will be science behind it. Of course there will. There's no such thing as magic. It just needs a new explanation. Science will get there one day. Because you know what? Every now and then, you get vindication. Yes, you do. Enough that when people try to talk about this, they should be listened to. Now, what's all that stuff about prophecy? All right, let's pull all this together now. So we've had this theme of people making prophecies for our times. There is possibly a tangible thing that could explain it, right? Now, check out the work of Dr. Paul Laviolette as but one example. He believes in the galactic superwave theory. And we've noticed, this is known, that other galaxies periodically pulse out these electromagnetic bands. They take thousands of years to pass through a galaxy. And Violette has noticed, looking at ice core samples, dust levels, which have repeating regular patterns, which he believes are brought in by these electromagnetic bands. And one of the things that you would look out for to know that one of these bands was passing through was unusual behaviour of the sun. And our sun, over the last 35 years or so, has broken all records for all kinds of activity, and yet has fallen very quiet in the last few years. We're now heading for one of the quietest sunspot periods ever, which, by the way, could generate global cooling. But we'll leave that for another time. So, here's the thing. The patterns, right, which are in the ice core samples, actually very, very similar to the ancient cycle recorded in the ancient calendars. Not exactly the same, but near enough. The Violette thinks that's what they were recording. The ancients realised, they didn't know what it was causing it, but they realised there was shift, there was change at these intervals. And human evolution seems to leap forward, usually with massive disruption to begin with. And many people today believe we are now, as we speak, transforming. Because experiments, look up Michael Persinger, Rick Strassman, look at their work. Experiments with electromagnetic fields on the human brain, and indeed the whole body, can have tremendous effects. And we are now in one massive electromagnetic anomaly. And that must be changing us. It must be changing the way our brains work, the way we think, the way we feel. This is going on now. And maybe that is why many feel we are at the dawn of something new. Everything's changing, isn't it? All the old certainties we used to have, they're falling away. And we're seeing movements like, Me Too and all of that. But there's a sense of we're not going to put up with things that we used to. Maybe that's what happens when we're all charged up by this changed electromagnetic environment. There is certainly evidence to say something's happening. And by the way, it probably affects the environment as well. And may well tie in with the natural cycles. But all the paranormal stuff, only some of which we've covered today, what these all do is they act as beacons to wake people up to see what's going on around them in a way that we are not being given in the mainstream. Because whatever you think about these areas, and they are truly intriguing when you look at the evidence, what all of them do is wake us up or make you inquire more, just become more aware of the world around you. And then you find you're rethinking everything. That's certainly what happened to me with crop circles. And I don't know what makes crop circles. I have no idea. But they've certainly led me to an awareness that there's lots of things going on in the world that we need to look at again, and hence all the other work that I do. But of course, the people at the tops of the glass pyramids, they don't want us to know that. An informed, educated public is a difficult public to control. The more stupid we are, the more poisoned by our toxic society we are, the easier we are to control. It's that straightforward, okay? And here's the thing. Just to go back to where we started earlier on, communication has changed massively. In our living memory, you almost can't believe that's within living memory. Now, just about, you've got this at your fingertips. But as we said in the first talk, get it while you can, right? But I'm not going to go through all that again. So we're now being reduced back to the state that we mentioned earlier. Or we will be, right? We will be if we don't stop it. But that's also true in the paranormal realms, right? So as well as all the more overt conspiracy realms, it's like they want to keep it for themselves. There's no question people in powerful places have a deep interest in the esoteric and the occult. This is their bread and butter, but they do not want us to have it. And there have been a number of thinkers over the last few years who've believed that the basic idea is to hold our spiritual nature down. We could expand and become something brilliant. And maybe that's what this cycle is. So what they're trying to do, because they feel threatened by it, is to dumb us down chemically, poison our culture, so that we cannot rise to a state where suddenly they become irrelevant. That is absolutely the last thing that they want. And the people that do try and talk about this, of course, they get shown to us like this. Here's the classic vision in the mainstream of a mystery researcher, Scooby-Doo. I quite like Scooby-Doo, but hey, that's not the story, is it, really? Actually, many of the people that study the realms we've only scratched the surface of today are very educated. Professors, teachers, students of all different sciences, and yet they're not heard out in the mainstream media. In my view, until we acknowledge these other realms and start properly, scientifically looking at them and accepting there might be something to it, we are going to be held down. I believe that eventually the new physics especially is going to rediscover this stuff. And already they're at that point. Quantum, the quantum world can be used to justify anything. But nonetheless, it is showing that many things that have been denied for years, actually, there probably is a reality. And they don't yet quite know what to do with that, because that might mean admitting they're wrong. So actually, if they can just kind of, in some way keep us down and stop us from having inquiring minds, well, they will. That is why the fact that you've shown up here this weekend is so important. People like Trevor and all the other people working on this to have made this happen through all, right, the fighting they've had to do to get this to even function, right? They're opening doors. And that's what we all have to do. When you leave here, if you leave here and then just go back to normal and do nothing with this information, you probably wasted a few quid. You need truly to get the word out there. And I'm being waved at from the back because I should mention also, there's a lot of podcasts, a lot of radio stations out there that's pumping this stuff out. It's there to be heard. Wave again at the back. Go on, wave. He is but one person doing amazing work, trying to get this out there. You all need to do at least one thing. If you leave here and do nothing, right, remember, Daddy, what did you do in the war? Mummy, what did you do? Play your part, right? Do one thing, even if it's just talking to one person. Tip the domino. Do something. If you do nothing, you're just not going to help. Right? You're going to be part of the problem. Do one thing. Do something. And then all of this will have been worthwhile. We know it's going to be uphill. We're not going to win anytime soon. But all of these things will come together ultimately. And I hope that what I've done in both these talks is to show that there is another world out there that is not being acknowledged. But the more we tap into it and the more we share it through conversation, through just the collective consciousness process of hoping that it will pass through and become something greater eventually, right, this will all have been worthwhile. So I hope this has been of some use to you. And thank you very much indeed for listening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Great stuff. Well done, Andy. So we're going to take a couple of questions. Anyone?
Yes, please. There's a lady here. Another one over there.
And that was very interesting. But my question is about crop circles. And I was always wondering why Ireland has never really had the numbers you have in England, France, Germany, whatever. What is your theory or thinking behind that?
I mean, this strange distribution of crop circles has been much debated. One interesting thing to point out is there might be a geological reason. If you look at Britain, and you look at where most of the British crop circles have appeared, it's largely in the south of England, some other areas, but that's the main patch. And the main concentration of them absolutely follows what's called the aquifers. So an aquifer is any rock that carries lots of water. It's beyond chance. Now, if it's all a big hoax, you don't need to do that, you just go and make them anywhere. Absolutely, they're coming back again and again to the areas where there's more underground water. Now, that suggests there's some geophysical process involved. It might not be the whole thing involved in the selection process, but it's a part of it. And it might just be that for some reason, Ireland doesn't do that, hasn't got that same geology. And like in North America, I mean, they've got huge fields where anything could be carved out, and they hardly get anything. Right? So either the aliens don't like Americans, or there's another explanation. But I do think the consciousness of a nation may also play a role. Now, that doesn't mean the English are better than anyone else. It might mean the opposite, that we're so fucking spiritually thick, we need waking up more. There's something to that, right? I mean, it's another idea. However, there are, of course, a million other arguments. It is much debated. Why so many in England? But then, like this summer, France suddenly... I mean, it's had them before. Suddenly it has a bumper year. Out of the blue. So, you know, it can suddenly shift. And who knows when Ireland might suddenly have a renaissance and you get lots of crop circles. It's not like you haven't got any fields, is it? So, yeah, I mean, it's a strange one. And I mean, like all the rest of the crop circle subject, the answer is we don't really know. But, yeah, it's certainly an area worth discussion.
Any more questions?
Got a chap down here?
Hi, Andy. Great talk, as always.
Okay.
Have you looked at putting your videos on different platforms other than YouTube, like BitChute, for example, or DTube, or any of these other things? With all the, with your previous talk, it's all been taken down. And if it's just going to be an uphill battle fighting every video, is it worth fighting the YouTube part and just put it somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, this is a way that some people are going, which I should have mentioned. Other platforms are also available. You're quite right. The problem is, I mean, yes, so the answer is yes, we should. Any platform, let's get it out there. The problem is, though, is people finding them. That's then just becomes a kind of a little conspiracy corner where the hope is that you've got to already know that world before you find it. It's better than nothing. The problem is getting the links out to the wider world, and that's where it's now being blocked. So yes, definitely so. Any and every platform we can use, we should. But getting that to be acknowledged by a wider world is going to be harder. But no, of course, you're absolutely right. There's more to life than YouTube. But sadly, the majority of people are going to look for stuff on YouTube, and one day when they don't find certain things, they won't think, oh, I'll find it elsewhere. They just won't think that it exists. And that's back to the Brave New World thing, where you get to a point where that's just some horrible distant past where nobody believed anything in the post-truth fake news years, and now we're more enlightened. So we don't need to look at that kind of stuff. So that's the problem. But no, right now, if you've got a platform, any platform, all and everyone, use them. Definitely use them. Yes, please.
Hi, Andy. It's more a comment. I, for want of better words, would refer to myself as a psychic medium. And just a couple of comments. To me, the eye represents the third eye, which is connected to the pineal gland, which studies are showing is all part of how you can see and connect with spirits. Seeing ghosts, picking up energies, that's all connected. It's also been proven that what they're adding to our water is reducing and hardening that. It's a gland that is like the shape of a pine cone. It's interesting that on the staff that the Pope carries, there is a pine cone. I can only speak about Catholicism, but when child is born, and baptism, there is a sign made on the forehead, which is to close that ability to be able to see and use powers that are innate to us. It's also done at death, so they try and get you in and out. Fear is a huge way of closing us down as well. Most people think of ghosts as things going woo in a white sheet. It's nothing like that. And I've had a lot of experience in different places, and I've had to clear spirit problems in houses. But it's an ability that a lot of us have, but for those reasons, it's not being open to us. Certainly the likes of meditation and things like that all help us to connect, but so many people consciously or subconsciously are terrified. The other thing I would say is that the mind cannot imagine anything that doesn't exist somewhere.
Well, thank you. I mean, I can't really do more than say yes. I think there is a truth to that. And absolutely, yes, being spiritually shut down, I think, yeah, they will do that at every opportunity. And not just religious organisations, but in effect, that's what they're trying to do to us every day. So, yes, we should always be aware of that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Andy. Round of applause for Andy.
Thanks very much. Thank you.